History is full of rich connections to God and the great outdoors He created for us. I'm on a mission to fellowship with other fathers as we introduce our sons and daughters to the beauty and bounty of the world where we are blessed to walk with our Heavenly Father in His garden. My name is Jacob Whitley, and this is Fathers and the Great Outdoors. Welcome back to Fathers in the Great Outdoors. Thank you for supporting this program. Make sure to subscribe, and if you want to check out additional content, you can look at our website, greatoutdoorspodcast.com. Today we have on Ken Yang. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing good. So I just like to jump into things, kind of going back into your background of how you got started in the great outdoors.
Yeah, I got started, fishing when, maybe I was probably 4 or 5 years old. Started fishing with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd go to like these little creeks and ponds where we used to live up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that's kind of where I got started. And he'd take me hunting sometimes. I would beg and cry to go, but I was 4 or 5 years old, but he would take me sometimes, and that's how I got started into fishing and hunting, man.
Yeah. What was there something specific about Wisconsin that you felt like was different than what you experience now?
No, I guess that's kind of where, I spent, or my family, we lived there for maybe 4 or 5 years before we moved to Atlanta, and then we moved to North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina now, but
Mm-hmm.
and I've been here since 1989. But that's kind of where, you know, um, I remember, starting off going fishing and hunting was in Milwaukee, and that was probably in like the early 80s. And so and I was, and that was when, that's only been like a few years since we came to the US. I mean, so we were in, I was born in Thailand, and so that's kind of,
Okay.
where we lived. My parents lived for a little while, and then we came to the US, and that's kind of where, we kind of landed.
Do you have uh, many memories from Thailand?
No, I was only a couple months old when
Okay.
before we came to the US. And I was actually born in a refugee camp in Thailand.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a story behind that you're okay talking about?
Yeah. We can talk about that. My parents were born in Laos, and so they, after the Vietnam War, they just kind of made that journey to Thailand, to where, to kind of escape communism.
Mm-hmm.
And and they traveled, probably, I think my dad told me, it was like almost 2 months that they lived in the jungle, just kind of traveling from Laos to get to Thailand, so that they can actually, have some, refuge from communism. And in the camp is where they kind of stayed for a few months, and that's where I was born. And then they were able to come to the US because a Lutheran church sponsored my family, or my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we came to the US.
Very cool. What was that? Because obviously you don't have any personal memories connected to that. What was that like, being raised by parents who raised you like in America with that kind of background?
It was, I didn't really know much different, because that was what it was at home. I
Mm-hmm.
just knew that my parents, struggled because they spoke very little English. And I remember my parents would work all the time just so that they could provide for my family. And so, I mean, we grew up very, very poor, actually. And
Mm-hmm.
because, and my dad went to school, after we came to the US, so that he can learn English and learn some things. And my mom did as well. And so they spoke, they both speak, pretty decent English, right now. But it was a struggle for them. Yeah.
Was there a connection to fishing kind of being an opportunity of leisure escape, if you will, for your
No, I
parents?
think it was more like it's what they were used to because in Laos, they were used to hunting and fishing and finding their own food in the out in and farming for their own food. So
Yeah.
fishing was just hunting was just kind of one of those things that they did. And so coming to America, that was just kind of what they are used to doing. And so that we went fishing for food and we caught
Mhm.
fish for food and we my parents hunted for food, and so that's what they did. And me now I fish for fun. I don't eat a whole lot of fish or wild game, but I usually just do it for fun and just the time to spend with my family.
Right. At what point did that transition from necessity to doing it for fun change?
Yeah, you talking for me or for
The
my parents?
both, I would say, because I assume it happened around the same time.
Yeah, well, I think my dad doesn't hunt and fish as much anymore, but I think it kind of transitioned to more of just doing it for leisure when, I guess, they were able to, have good jobs and didn't really need to have, the wild fish or the wild game, and they were able to buy, meat, and vegetables, or they grow most of their own vegetables right now anyway, but I think that, it kind of transitioned when they were able to, kind of, purchase some of those things instead of having to go out and gather it. And
Right.
same thing with me, I grew up eating fish and wild game, but it just kind of got to the point where I ate it so much that I got kind of tired of eating,
Yeah.
fish and deer and wild hogs and stuff. Now I just don't eat it that much.
Right. Get too used to having it, and then you have other people like me that go out to get it uh because I want the taste.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So how do you think I guess kind of like looking at your own life from an outside perspective, do you think you ended up raising your own kids with a different I guess like ideology is perspective, trying to think of the right word, because of how your parents raised you due to their background?
No, well, I think that with my kids, we didn't need to have fish or wild game to eat to survive, and my kids didn't really like eating it that much either, and so I think for us it was more of just spending time together, having fun, enjoying nature. I mean, we'll eat fish and we'll eat whatever we shoot and kill, but it's not something that we say, hey, we need meat in the freezer, so let's go shoot something or let's go
Yeah.
kill something. It wasn't really like that. Yeah,
Well,
just like now, if I go fishing, I mostly just catch and release.
okay. So it literally is just for the enjoyment.
Yeah, yeah, and I go, I kind of joke about it with my friends, and I've been deer hunting for a long time, and in the last 7 or 8 years, I go deer hunting, and I see deer, I don't even shoot them, and I keep buying my tags every year, but I don't even shoot a deer, and
Yeah.
so, but yeah,
Does the catch and release idea bother your parents at all?
no, it doesn't bother them.
Okay. How did your kids get introduced to the outdoors?
I started taking them when they were little, and I started them off, when they were probably as like 2, 3 years old, when they could kind of walk, and I'd take them fishing with me. We'd go on the boat, or we'd go to the, to the lake shore, or just something, just catching bluegills, and that's kind of, we guess just kind of what we did, and that's how I introduced them to fishing. And then when they got a little bit older, I took them hunting with me, and and so we did that.
Very
And so
cool.
I mean, most of my almost all my kids, I have three boys, and my two oldest are, they're in their 20s now, but they don't go as much as as I would like and what they used to, but they still make some time to go sometimes.
Yeah. That seems to be the trend, especially when they get to that college age. They take a little break.
Yeah, yeah, they're more into girls.
Yes. Yeah, I guess that would take up the time as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. When I was dating my wife, I definitely put a lot aside that a lot of the activities aside that I was doing at the time.
yeah, yeah,
Um, how so with your you said it was a Lutheran church that sponsored you?
yeah, yeah. It was a Lutheran church that sponsored my family. Yeah.
Were your parents followers of Christ at that time?
They were not at the time. They knew about God. I think there were some missionaries that came to my parents' village when they were still living in Laos, but they were not. But when we came to the U.S., we had some relatives that were already in the U.S. and they were, believers of Christ, and so my parents started going to church with them. And so I actually grew up in the church.
Very cool. What how is your kids' relationship with God?
I mean, they're, I mean, very strong. I mean, when we go to church every Sunday, my son just got my middle son just got baptized just, yeah, I think a month and a half or 2 months ago.
Congrats.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
That's very cool. Um, so I assume that since birth they've kind of had that kind of introduction, and
Yeah,
um, I'm assuming that you've been teaching them a lot about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. God's a big part of our lives, and I teach them to pray. I teach them to, talk and walk with God. I teach them what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and what you know and what it looks like to be somebody that is you know somebody that believes in Jesus. And so
Hmm.
I think my oldest son struggles with it a little bit because his girlfriend's not a Christian, and so and I told him that, hey, the only way that she's gonna be able to see Jesus is actually through you, and and so you've got to work on it. You got to be intentional with it, and he's working on that with his girlfriend, and so
Yeah, that's good.
yeah.
My brother-in-law grew up Jewish, and he actually ended up going to, I think it was a Baptist church,
Hmm.
because of a girl he liked,
Yeah.
and he's married to my sister now,
Hmm.
but that experience actually helped him. Um, like he was listening and things like that, and it
Yeah.
opened up his mind to um, realizing who Jesus Christ was, and
Hmm.
that definitely is a pathway that I've heard stories like that
Yeah.
of helping people transition. Um,
Hmm.
so best of luck to him, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure it'll turn out really well. Um, has your kids had any either hunting or fishing experiences with your grandfather? With their grandfather?
Uh, not really, because my dad doesn't go very much anymore.
Yeah.
And so he'll probably go, maybe once or twice a year now. He hardly doesn't fish anymore, because he I don't know, he just doesn't really enjoy it as much. And then plus my mom needs him at home to help her with the chicken coop and the farming and the
Hmm.
all the stuff that they do. They're planting a huge rice field this year, even bigger than last year. So my dad's been doing that
Oh,
because
very cool.
my parents are retired, so that's
Are they still in Wisconsin?
no, they live here in North Carolina.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Um, how is their relationship with them in general, between the
Oh,
kids
it's
and the
great.
parents?
Yeah, 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 yeah. My kids' relationship with my parents are are great. Um, and yeah, I think my whole family will all get along pretty good.
Good. Do you guys have you ever been back I guess to either Thailand or Vietnam?
No, I've never been back. My parents have been back a few times, but I've never been back. My wife and I were just kind of talking about it the other month about possibly visiting, but it's she decides she doesn't want to go there. If we're going to go to Asia, she wants to go somewhere else. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I get that. But I'm sure the fishing experiences could be fun there.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It could be. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Um, what would you say you see God in the great outdoors?
I see God everywhere, actually. I see it in the time that I spend with my kids. I see him, in nature. I see him in the woods. I see him you know, um, just the beauty of what, God's creation, like the water, the ocean. I mean, he's everywhere. I see him everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What with your kids being a little older,
Hmm.
do you think they have a certain connection um, to God in relation to some kind of activity in the outdoors or experience?
I would hope so, because I talk about it a lot with them, and my wife does as well, and so I would hope that they do. I think that my youngest is, he's 17, so he's kind of going through that stage of trying to figure out, life for himself and all these, and what's, what the world means and what his life means. And so I think he's, in that curiosity or that curious stage in his life right now.
Hmm.
But I think that my oldest and my middle son, I think that they've got a pretty good grasp of, what of God and and the great outdoors and the fish and the animals and it's one of the things that I try to teach them is that we don't just kill an animal just because we want to kill an animal, and so because it's God's creation. And so yeah, it's just some of the things that I try to teach my kids about, things like that.
Yeah. In I guess most of the past at this time, that whenever ever you were either in a blind with them hunting or maybe on a boat, kind of that
Hmm.
isolated place, did you ever
Yeah.
find them opening up a little more, the kind of one-on-one time?
Yeah, yeah. Usually, they'll talk a little bit more about what's happening in their life, and I'll ask more open-ended questions, But one of the things I learned, Jacob, and then I'll tell you this is that when my kids were younger and I started taking them hunting and fishing, the trip was really about them and their experience. And so, and what I mean by that is if my son said, "Hey, Dad, I'm tired. I want to go home now," even if we've only been in the blind or the stand for like 30 minutes, we're
Hmm.
going home. Because I'm not gonna make them sit out there, and be cold, and then they're miserable and they don't ever want to go back. And I remember specifically, I took my youngest son. He was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I had a blanket and I had all kinds of stuff with him, and we were sitting in the blind, and we didn't it was kind of cold that morning, and we were talking, and he was excited about shooting his first deer, and after about 30 minutes he's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm too cold. I don't want to be here. I want to go home." And I just said, "Okay, if you want to go home, we can go home." And we came home, and I wasn't upset and or any of that stuff, but I made the trip about them. And I think that sometimes, you know, as as a hunter, when we're out there, we're thinking, "Hey, I want to get out here. I want to see a deer. I want to shoot a deer, and it doesn't matter. I'm going to shoot a deer." And I think in my experience, I think that if we brought our kids out there, and if we're making it about their experience, then even if they want to go home, I'll take them home. And that allows them to be able to see that, hey, Dad's not going to force me to be out here all day, and they're
Yeah.
going to want to go again. And so
And so it wasn't hard to get him back in the blind.
No, no, it wasn't. We went back probably the next week, and he stayed a little bit longer that time, but yeah, yeah.
How long or how many trips did it take to get his first deer?
Um, he didn't actually shoot his first deer until actually several years later. And but I think that with me doing it like that or making it about his experience, he was willing to go more often. Sometimes he didn't want to go, but he was willing to go more often because he knew that if he wanted to go home or if he wasn't feeling good or whatever, then I would bring him back home.
Yeah, very cool. For your kids, I guess between each of them, what is the preference between hunting and fishing?
You know, they all grew up doing both, but as they got older, I think that, my oldest is more of a fisherman, and my middle son is more, in doing stuff with his girlfriend, so he doesn't, and do a whole lot anymore. But he used to really enjoy hunting. He was actually my hunting partner, my middle son.
Yeah.
He'd want to go everywhere, and I think it's just because he wants to shoot something, but he likes having a gun. Um, and sometimes when we don't see anything, I let him be able to, like target practice or shoot some targets or something. So he enjoyed doing that. And then my youngest son, he enjoys hunting, but he likes ocean fishing, and he won't go fishing in the lakes or any of that stuff. He'd right if we're going to the ocean, then he's going. So, but if I'm going to the lake, he don't want to
Hmm.
go.
Is there a particular reason for that?
He says that he likes the action or the fight that with some of the bigger fish in the ocean. So
Okay.
because whenever we go to the ocean, we're usually offshore, and he's always jigging for amberjack, and so that's his favorite thing to do. And so yeah, that's what he enjoys doing, just dropping a jig down and just catching those big amberjacks.
Yep. Lots of fun.
Yeah.
For the hunting experiences, was it always just deer?
Was this what now?
Was it always deer the focus for hunting?
Yeah, yeah. Well, deer hunting, we squirrel hunted, we dove hunted. We all really enjoyed dove hunting. Um, but then when my kids got to where they turned 16 and needed a license, they didn't want to get the license anymore. So that's when they kind of stopped going.
I mean, I have to pay for this.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
So
for some
they
reason,
choose to go fishing instead.
yeah. But for some reason, that reminds me of a friend of mine. When he was of the age of having to be responsible for his own car, he had
Hmm.
um like three late penalties for not. I think it was his tags. He never updated his
Yeah, yeah,
tags, and he's like,
yeah,
"What do you mean I have to pay for this? It's my car."
yeah,
Going
yeah.
through
You
all
gotta pay to
this.
renew that tag. Yeah,
Yep. So it's pretty fun. Fun,
yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Um, what would you say is the significance and importance of a father's role in teaching their kids about Christ?
I would say we are called to lead. As men, we're called to lead. We're called to teach our kids about Christ, about Jesus, about God. I mean, it's our responsibility. It's and I tell my kids that, as a man, it's your responsibility to teach your kids to lead your family to Christ. I mean, it's sad, but most men don't, and so, but yeah, I believe it's our responsibility as men.
Yep. Do you think there's um, something specific that was a part of the journey or how God led your family here?
Yeah, I think so. Because I see my dad doing that with our family. My dad was always the leader at church, over leading us to go to church. And so I saw that growing up, so and I would say that, God led my parents out of Laos and into Thailand, and that was, I guess I'm assuming that's kind of what my dad saw it as too, that God led them to freedom. And into a better life, into an opportunities. And so, it's his responsibility to do that, to be the man of the house and to be the person that takes care of his family. And, and so that's kind of where I got it from as well, is that, I saw my dad do it. And, my dad's dad, or my grandfather, didn't make the trip, or didn't make it on the trip to Thailand. He passed away in the jungle. And so,
Hmm.
so yeah, so I don't think my dad saw or got to see, because my dad was probably in his maybe early 20s, when his dad passed away. And so there wasn't a whole lot of example or role model to be able to teach him about God or Jesus. And you know but
Yeah.
he did. My dad did the best he could, and he did a great job.
Yeah, I bet he did. What what is your kids' reaction to that story?
They are my youngest is kind of like, okay, but my oldest son and my middle son is they really see that God is at the center of everything, and they see that without faith in Jesus, or without faith in God, it's like there's it's you have all these situations that you're dealing with, and you're still going to deal with it, but having trusting in God gives you hope, and gives you something to kind of look forward to, and you know to really rely on.
Yeah. What the path that you see your kids moving on in relation
Mhm.
to their own faith, do you see um a certain direction that they're heading as far as what they're going to do with their faith, or at least what you're hoping they're going to
Yeah,
do?
I from what I can see right now, I believe that all three of my kids are moving in a direction that's growing in their faith with God, and moving towards God. And I think that I have a little bit of anxiety, or not anxiety, but a little bit of um, concern with my oldest, because his wife's not. I mean, his girlfriend is not a Christian.
Hmm.
And um, not that it's bad or wrong, but it's going to be a little more challenging for him
Right.
to and being more intentional with his faith in God. And he's brought her to church many times, and she's just been kind of like, I don't believe it. I don't believe that there's a God. I don't believe that God exists. And so it's I just pray that that he's going to continue to be diligent, and be strong in his faith, and be able to still believe in God, and bring her closer to God, even though his girlfriend and his possible future wife may not.
Yeah.
So
What's her what, do you think she's just possibly open to the idea, or do you think there's something else as to why she is attending church and things like that, instead of pushing
I
back
think that
more?
she attends because he asked her to. I think that there's a small possibility that she thinks it may be something that she can have faith in, or believe in. But her parents don't believe in God either, and
Hmm.
both her parents and her grandparents, they come from a background of shamanism, and so that's kind of what they do. That's their faith, and so he's got to be he's got to deal with that. And I think that she's open. She's probably open a little bit to it, but I just don't know.
Yeah. Well, pray that God softens her heart, and
Yeah,
all the best to them.
yeah.
What would you say? Do you have any bucket list fishing trips or hunts?
I would like to go to me and my kids, all three of them. We would like to go to Panama. you know, the maybe Tropic Star Lodge, you know, or one of those, big, lodges down there that takes you, fishing out in the ocean for
Yeah.
big yellowfin and big dolphin. And yeah, that's kind of something that we've talked about a few times about doing.
Have you ever heard of, oh, what's his name? Uh, I want to say his first name is Robert. I could have that wrong, but it's like Robert Field Trips, or Field Trips
Mm-mm.
with Robert Field or something like that. He's done a couple of videos where he's got one of those paddle kayaks and he's out
Mm-hmm.
off of, he goes all over,
Yeah.
I guess, the world at this point. He started with just America. Um, uh, or the United States, rather. I should be specifically
Yeah.
say. But there's a couple where he goes right off of Panama, and then he's part of like a group, and they'll bring, every time they catch something big, they bring it back to a center boat, and then they
Yeah.
flay them and cook them at the end. And I'm just like, oh,
Oh yeah.
that looks like the dream right there.
Yeah. 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 That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think the closest thing I have to here, which actually is probably a little closer to you, is the gentleman who does he has like a charter boat, and he also does duck hunts, and I guess he has like a oyster shuck in the middle of the day that he does. So I want to sign up for something like that, but as
Yeah.
far
Yeah.
as like an all-inclusive package, I think that's the closest
Oh
thing I'm
yeah.
aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds pretty cool too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you here you're in North Carolina too, aren't you?
I am. Yeah, I'm just south of Raleigh.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's in the right there in the middle of the state.
yeah, halfway to the mountains, halfway to the beach. Thought it was a good
Yeah.
place. This is um because I'm originally from California, so the location I came to was, there's a little bit of a story behind it, but basically felt like this is where God was calling my family. So
Yeah. Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah. 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 So you like to go fishing as well, or is it just hunting or?
Both. I would say my original passion is fishing,
Yeah.
it still is. I got into hunting a little late just because anybody I knew that hunted when I was in California, they were on the East Coast, so I didn't have
Hmm.
that connection of someone to learn under. Um, so I started with a friend late in life, and then I did most of my big hunts with my father-in-law,
Yeah.
after I
Yeah.
was married. But yeah, fishing has always been a huge passion, and that one was taught by my grandfather on my dad's side, and
Yeah.
I just kind of, I love it all: lakes, rivers, ocean. I would say I'm
Hmm.
definitely more of an ocean person. I haven't had
Yeah.
too much chance for the East Coast, and anything that I've done has always been surf fishing. I haven't had a chance to get
Yeah.
on a boat here.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Um,
should go, man. This
yeah,
is the time of year. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I've got a big well, not really big, but I got a 27-foot sea hunt, and so I love fishing offshore, and
Yeah.
so
How often do you go?
as often as I can, and so
Yeah.
but mostly it's weather dependent, and so yeah, that's the only thing with fishing offshore is that it's dependent on the weather, and so if the wind's blowing, I can't go. If
Yes.
the winds calm down, then we're going.
Yeah, I
So
imagine, because you don't want it to
yeah,
be Harry coming back or in the middle of
yeah.
it and then have to turn around and hope you make it back.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I used to not know that, and I mean, there were times that I'd go, I didn't even make it out the inlet, it was just so rough,
Ooh,
in a much smaller boat. But now, I've learned, and I don't go out unless it's pretty nice out.
right. Well, at least you didn't make it out and get instead of getting stuck out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know some people that got stuck out there, or took them a lot longer to get back in. They got stuck in a storm, or just way too rough, and so
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
yeah, yeah,
There is I don't know if you have to take a special boat too, but there's I think it's called the Frying Pan
yeah.
just
The
south
frying
of
pan tower.
Wilmington.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because another passion of mine is snorkeling, and so far that seems to be the only spot that seems like you could actually go, but it would be way too far to swim to from the coast, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, it's about 40 miles from
Yeah,
from Wilmington.
there
Yeah,
you
so it's
go.
quite a
That would,
it's quite a haul down there. And I
yeah.
don't think you'd want to snorkel, down there because I think it's still about 60, 70 feet deep. And there's a ton of sharks out there. But there's a bunch of bottom out there as well too. So
Hmm.
you mean some good bottom fishing out in that area.
Yeah. What is it you usually like to fish for?
I enjoy bottom fishing, but I'll do some trolling, some jigging and some popping as well. But bottom fishing is kind of what I really like to do.
So it's mostly about the style rather than what you're trying to catch.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're bottom fishing, you're catching grouper,
Hmm.
snappers, grunts, stuff like that. When you're trolling, then you have chance at catching dolphin, tuna, wahoo,
Hmm.
sailfish, marlin, those kinds of fish.
Okay. I guess that makes sense because you do prefer the catch and release.
Hmm.
Is there something that if you were to get, you keep regardless?
Yeah, grouper.
Grouper?
Yeah, yeah. I really love grouper.
Yeah.
Grouper and triggerfish. Actually, I just had some triggerfish, for lunch and dinner today.
Oh, fun.
So, yeah, yeah.
Very
I'll
cool.
keep those because I'll eat those.
Yeah. How do you like to cook that?
Actually, I made some fish, sandwich out of the triggerfish today. And I was gonna make some fish tacos, but my wife said she didn't want any, so I was like, I've got, I made some homemade tartar sauce, and so I just, fried it up, and made a couple sandwiches out of it, and that's what I had for lunch and for dinner.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's usually what I ended up doing if I have like the individual pieces of something. If it's thin, I could thaw it
Hmm.
in just a few minutes, so I ended up making a sandwich
Yeah.
out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my kids and my wife, they really like to eat it raw, but I don't eat raw fish, but I caught some bonita a couple weeks ago, um and my son made it into some ceviche and some
Mm.
some sashimi, and they ate on it for like a couple days. But just one of the things I just don't like eating raw stuff, but
Texture
they
or
do.
just the idea?
Yeah, yeah, the idea and the texture, it just kind of, just not, yeah, it just makes me not, yeah, I'm just not into it.
Are you not a fan of sushi either?
No, no, I'll eat the cooked sushi, but not the
Yeah.
raw sushi.
California rolls and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, California roll or like a, fried shrimp roll or something.
Yeah. Luckily, they have cooked options.
Yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah.
always wondered how different sushi is in Japan compared to here.
I don't know. It might be a little bit different.
Yeah. It's 100% raw.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
um, do you have a favorite Bible verse?
Yeah, the common one, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Hmm.
Philippians 4:13.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's one of those that, as I was growing up as a young teenager, just kind of, thinking about, what I want to do for my life and what I want to do as a, as a man, and just, that Bible verse really just kind of gave me the strength to go out there and take the action and do what it takes and do what I need to do, and knowing that, if it's God's will, then it's going to happen,
Yeah.
and, I've had lots of accomplishments in my life and lots of failures, but, through it all, I mean, I see God in all of it, you know.
You ever have uh like Bible verses you're aware of, but they have stronger meaning later in life?
Yeah, there was one that keeps coming to mind, and actually my wife and I talked about it the other day. It's in James. I don't remember the actual verse, but I know it's in James, and it says, resist the devil and he will flee. And I see that in my life and my relationships with my wife, and especially with my wife, and with my family. is that, the enemy is constantly working in my life. I mean,
Hmm.
he's looking for ways to get in, especially with my marriage, get in and just kind of, puts all these thoughts in my head, and I, as I got, older, and as that verse becomes more and more, prevalent in my life, I'm seeing that, if I don't resist the devil or the enemy, it's like I'm giving him a seat at the table, at my table, right? I'm giving the enemy a seat at my table, and I don't want to do that, because once he has a seat at my table, I mean, it's like it can go south real quick, and I won't even know it. I won't even know it until it's like, I'm already like, way, beyond where I'm comfortable. And that's the thing with, the enemy, is that, when we don't resist him, it's like, he shows up in ways that, we don't think that it's the enemy showing up.
Hmm. Yeah, it sneaks in real easy, and
Hmm.
it's kind of funny because certain things can happen, and your mind continues as one continuous thought. Then all of a sudden you're like, how did that get in there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's, that's how it works, and I keep reminding myself that, you know, whenever, things aren't going the way that I think they should, or when I'm feeling a little upset or frustrated, I always have to remember that, it's times like that that allows for the enemy to grab a foothold in whatever it is that I'm trying to do, or whatever it is that God's trying to do for me or in my life. So
Right. Yeah. Can be scary, but also there's the inspiration behind knowing that
yeah,
God's always with you.
yeah, yeah.
With the um there was a lot of apostles that were fishermen. Do you
Hmm.
think there's a connection to that and following Jesus?
I think so. I'm reminded of, Simon, that, that's Peter. I reminded of him, and I think about it sometimes that, maybe God wants, me to be somebody like Peter, that, that's a fisher of men. And I've been having these, thoughts, or, thinking about how to grow, or incorporating, you know, Christ like stuff, or Christ like, or incorporating God into, like some of the things that I'm doing for, in my business. And but then I don't, I guess I don't want to make it seem exclusive, for people, because, and I kind of share a little bit with what I'm doing, so so I've been a car dealer for, over 20 years, and I recently sold my business, and so I've created a course that I teach people how to flip cars, and I also coach, people that are car dealers. And one of the things I wanted to do was really bring scripture, or bring God into that, and that the principle, of, the, principles that Jesus kind of, sets us out. I mean, sets out for us to kind of follow. I mean, really can help an individual really grow and expand their business. And but I don't want to make it seem that it's like, it's, you've got to be a Christian in order to be able to, you know, you know, to be able to, grow your, or start your business. And so I've
Hmm.
been thinking about that, and so yeah, I've been praying about it and thinking about it, how I can do that. But yeah,
What's the reason for wanting to distinguish that?
to distinguish,
That you
like,
don't have to be a Christian to start a
well,
business.
I guess what I'm wanting to do is is give, or be able to, not really, I don't want to say sneak in, but I want to be able to expose people to, what it means to be a Jesus follower, or what it means to be a Christian, and that you can still be a Christian and still run a profitable business. And what I'm my concern is that, if I start saying, hey, you gotta, you know you got to be a Christian or whatever it is, then I'm afraid that I might turn, people might get um, turned away from that, and I won't be able to share with them how God's worked in my life. And so, what I want to be able to do is bring as many people as possible that are interested in learning how to grow their business or flip cars, and then, share with them, hey, this is how I do it. This is what's made a difference in my life. And these are some of the Christian principles that I use to run and grow my business. And maybe they have, that maybe they'll be able to see, um, God through what it is that I'm teaching them. But I
Yeah.
don't want to scare them away by saying, hey, you got to be a Christian or, whatever.
Right. And I don't think you have to be explicit like that, but I also don't think you necessarily need to hide the fact. And
Mm-hmm.
I could use this podcast as an example, um, where I wasn't sure how people were going to react. Like, oh, it's about being a father in the great outdoors. It's also about teaching them
Mm-hmm.
about God. I don't want anything to do with that kind of thing. And just being open about it, that this is the theme of the show. Essentially, it's gained a lot of interest actually specifically because of that. So if I had
Mm-hmm.
hid that little piece, and obviously we talk about it during the show, but in the just describing to people what the show's about, I don't think it would
Mm-hmm.
have had as much of a initial following as it did.
Mm-hmm.
It surprised me how quickly I started getting subscriptions and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Compared, my background's in film, I've done all sorts of stuff in media. I've never had anything that's had this kind of interest before, and I think it's because I've been able to be more open about who I am rather than hiding it. Back when I lived in Hollywood, California area,
Mm-hmm.
um, I
So
would say
you think I should say that
I
or
would
explain?
I would say have it in the language.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you have to be a Christian or anything like that, but like this is a faith-based program or whatever it is you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's the intent behind it, but make it very casual, like almost like it's like, well, of course that's what it's about. And of course there's a
Mm-hmm.
God and things like that, rather than trying to tiptoe around it and just being more blunt about it. But you don't have to fill it with like SEO Christian words like over and over again.
Yeah.
Because I think that's kind of what your concern is, that you would scare people away of just faith, 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 faith. And instead it should
Mm-hmm.
be, I have faith. That's in my language, but this is the program. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just my 2 cents on that. I think you'll be surprised by the results.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Um, but it's very cool. Is
Yeah.
that going to be like a public speaking thing, or is it mostly going to be kind of a classroom setting?
You talking about the course?
Yeah.
It's online based, or it's a pre-recorded type of training course.
Right.
And so
Okay.
so I have that, and then I have I do one-on-one coaching with the dealers, and then I'm also a um what is it? I'm also a moderator for a group of probably 50 or 60 or so dealers, as well. And um so yeah, most of it's done online or on Zoom, or sometimes I have to go to someone's dealership, but yeah, I really don't want to do that.
Yeah. My full-time job is my father or my grandfather started a carpet cleaning company back in 78. So my
Mhm.
father and I currently run it. And we've moved it from California to North Carolina. But with our certification board, we're both master cleaners, which actually gets us to the point of becoming instructors if we want. So
Yeah.
we've kind of joked around with the idea of traveling to people's businesses, but at the same time, we don't really want to go.
Yeah, yeah. Like I tell a lot of my dealers, a lot of stuff that they're struggling with. I mean, it's really them, and it's really the limiting belief that they have, about their business that's causing them to struggle the way that they're struggling with, and so a lot of it can be addressed, via Zoom or over the phone,
Right.
but if somebody really wants me to be at their dealership, I mean, I can come, but it's not going to be cheap,
Yeah.
so but yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of truth to the that Gordon Ramsay show that he has. I was going to say Hell's Kitchen, Kitchen Nightmares, where he goes
Yeah,
to
yeah.
actual
Oh yeah,
restaurants.
yeah, yeah,
It's almost always the owners are the problem.
yeah. Yeah, 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 that's right. I mean, it really is, and it starts from the top down, and it's like, if your team's not working, or if the culture is not working, or not the way you want it to do, it's you as the boss that's creating it, or causing that to happen. And a lot of times people don't realize, that that's really them,
Hmm.
and I had one dealer I was talking to about a month or so ago, and he was just telling me that his sales are down and everything is down, and and stuff. And so I just asked him, I was like, so how do you think they are? And he was like, oh man, I think that the market sucks. I think that people don't have any money. And I was like, well, it starts with you, man. If you're saying that the market's not good, and everything is not working, or everything just sucks, then that's what you're telling you. That's what your team is seeing, is that everything is not good. And so that's probably why your sales are down. Well, it's not probably, it is why your sales are down. And so I was like, we got to change that.
Yeah.
So no.
Good time to help people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, that about wraps up all the questions I had. Did you have anything else you were hoping to talk about?
I'm really, grateful to be on the show and on your podcast. And I think that more men should do it, and should really be interested in in leading, and and sharing what's going on with in their life, and in their faith, with on shows like yours. And so I'm glad to be here, and um, I'm glad that you invited me on.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. I would really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I appreciate it, man. Like I said, man, let's do some fishing together, man.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep you posted on that and come
Yeah,
down to the coast. Where specifically do you like to go out of?
I usually go out of Wilmington. My boat's out in Wilmington, so
Okay.
that's kind of where I go out of.
Do you mind if 6-year-old tags along?
No, no, I mean, definitely. If you got some little ones that want to go, we can definitely make a trip specifically for them. So
Very cool.
uh,
I appreciate that.
yeah, 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 man. Let's keep in touch, and let's do a trip together, man.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, man.
All right.
Have a good one.
Thank you for tuning in on greatoutdoorspodcast.com. And if you happen to be listening or watching on one of our social media platforms, you should check out greatoutdoorspodcast.com for some cool merch like this hat, or this awesome coffee cup for camping, and this awesome sweater as well, which features our classic Genesis 27:3. Take your quiver and your bow and go hunt me some venison. Your wife's going to love the way you look in this. Right, honey?
Uh-huh.
greatoutdoorspodcast.com.
Why?